Gemini, understanding imposter syndrome and why you always feel like a fraud. Gemini, you are a soul born with a brilliant mind, a quick tongue, and a restless hunger for knowledge. People often admire your adaptability, your wit, and your ability to weave words and ideas into something magnetic. Yet beneath that sparkle, there is often a quieter, heavier truth you rarely confess. The feeling that no matter what you achieve, it's never enough. That one day, someone will see through the mask and discover you are not as capable, intelligent, or worthy as they believe. This is a shadow of imposter syndrome, and for Gemini, it can become a silent companion. You question your successes, downplay your gifts, and secretly wonder if you've only gotten as far by luck or chance. It doesn't matter how many degrees, promotions, or praises you collect. Your inner critic whispers, "What if I don't actually belong here?" The truth is, this inner struggle does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. And as a Gemini, it is also tied to your unique energy. You live in duality, always aware of multiple perspectives, always sensing there's more to learn. This openness makes you brilliant, but it can also make you feel like you never fully know enough. You compare yourself constantly, chasing perfection, forgetting that wisdom is not about knowing everything. It's about embodying your truth. If you've ever felt the weight of pretending, the fear of being found out, or the exhaustion of striving to prove yourself, this is your invitation to pause. Here, together, we will unravel why this pattern clings so tightly to you, and more importantly, how you can begin to heal it. And as you listen, if these words resonate, allow yourself to share this journey with others, because you are far from alone in this experience. For Gemini, imposter syndrome doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It is deeply connected to the way you see yourself and the way you are seen by the world. You are born under the sign of the twins, a symbol of duality. This duality blesses you with flexibility, curiosity, and the ability to adapt in almost any environment. But it also carries a shadow. You often feel split between two selves, the one the world admires and the one you secretly doubt. This tension creates fertile ground for imposter syndrome to take root. From a young age, Geminis often receive praise for their intelligence, their quickness with words, or their ability to learn new things quickly. You become known as the smart one, the communicator, or the multitasker. On the surface, this feels rewarding, but inside it plants a seed of pressure. What if I can't live up to this image? What if they realize I don't always have the answers? Every time you succeed, instead of feeling secure, you feel the bar has only been raised higher. You begin to believe your worth is tied to performance, to endlessly proving yourself. This restlessness is intensified by your mercurial nature. Mercury, your ruling planet, thrives on gathering information and communicating ideas. You are always learning, always exploring, always scanning for new possibilities. Yet the very gift of seeing so many perspectives makes you painfully aware of what you don't know. While others may feel content with their knowledge, you see gaps everywhere. You compare yourself to experts, colleagues, or even strangers online, and you find reasons to believe you fall short. Imposter syndrome thrives here, in the endless comparison game, in the belief that someone else knows more, has done more, or is more deserving than you. Think of it this way. Your intellect is like a library constantly expanding, but because you see the shelves that are still empty, you forget how many books already fill the room. This is a trap Gemini often falls into. You dismiss your own knowledge because you are acutely aware of the infinite things you do not yet know. And so, instead of celebrating your brilliance, you minimize it. Let's look at how this plays out in real life. Imagine a Gemini who has just been promoted to a leadership role. Everyone praises their ability to connect, inspire, and innovate. Yet inside, they feel paralyzed. What if I don't really know how to lead? What if I only got this position because I talk well in meetings? What if they realize I'm not as competent as they think? These doubts don't reflect reality. They reflect the duality within. Logic may show you the evidence of your skills, but your inner critic whispers that it's all a facade. Another scenario might be a Gemini student who excels academically but constantly feels behind. They earn high grades but compare themselves to peers who seem more confident. Instead of acknowledging their success, they attribute it to luck, extra study, or even tricking the system. The truth is, This is not a reflection of their ability, but of their internal lens. They cannot internalize their achievements because they are too busy anticipating the moment it will all collapse. There is also a cultural and generational layer. Many Geminis grew up in environments where intelligence and communication were highly valued, but emotional authenticity was overlooked. You may have learned to perform, to charm, to speak well, to succeed outwardly, even if inwardly you doubted yourself. This creates a sense of living with a mask. The world applauds one version of you, but you carry the secret fear that if the mask slips, your fraudulent self will be revealed. And let's not forget your natural gift of adaptability. Gemini can walk into almost any room and blend in. You shapeshift, adjusting your tone, your style, your energy to fit the people around you. This is a beautiful skill, but it can leave you feeling like you don't have a solid core. If you're always adapting, who are you really? And if you're always performing, is there a moment when others will realize you were just playing roles? Imposter syndrome feeds on this flexibility, twisting it into belief that you are never truly authentic. Yet, here lies the deeper truth. What you call fraud is often simply growth. You doubt yourself precisely because you are stretching into new spaces. You feel like you don't belong because you are evolving, stepping into rooms your younger self could not have imagined. For Gemini, imposter syndrome is not a sign of inadequacy. It is a sign of expansion. Your soul is leading you into bigger arenas, and your mind is catching up. Healing begins with recognizing this. When the inner critic says you're a fraud, pause and ask, or am I just evolving? When the voice says, I don't know enough, remember, you will never know everything, but what you know is already enough for this moment. When you feel like you are performing, remind yourself, adaptability is not deceit. It is a gift of empathy and connection. Imposter syndrome is not a flaw unique to you. It is a mirror of your brilliance. Only those who are aware, capable, and ambitious ever feel it. Those who do nothing rarely wrestle with these doubts. The fact that you feel this tension is proof that you are moving, growing, reaching for more. For Gemini, understanding this truth is a first step toward turning imposter syndrome from a burden into a teacher. It shows you where you are expanding, where you're being called to trust yourself, and where you must learn to integrate your two selves, the one the world sees and the one you carry inside. For Gemini, imposter syndrome often deepens because of the relentless voice of self-criticism. You are ruled by Mercury, the planet of thought and communication, which makes your inner dialogue especially powerful. Yet when this gift turns inward in a harsh way, it becomes the very weapon you use against yourself. Instead of celebrating what you've achieved, you analyze every flaw, every mistake, every gap in your knowledge until your successes feel hollow. The Gemini mind is like a kaleidoscope, constantly shifting, endlessly reframing, able to see things from countless angles. This is a strength when it comes to problem solving, but in the realm of self-worth, it becomes a trap because you can always imagine another angle. You can always imagine how you should have done better. Did you finish a project successfully? You'll still think of 3 ways it could have been improved. Did you receive praise? You'll quickly dismiss it, saying, they're just being nice, or if only they knew how uncertain I really felt. Your ability to question everything, including yourself, feeds a cycle of feeling like a fraud. Comparison intensifies the cycle. Gemini thrives in social spaces, and you often measure yourself against others without realizing it. You see colleagues who appear more confident, friends who seem more accomplished, strangers online who project flawless success, and you internalize a belief that you don't measure up. Yet here's the paradox. Many of those people may be looking at you with the same envy. They see your quick wit, your adaptability, your ease in conversation, and they assume you're the one who has it all figured out. Imposter syndrome thrives on this illusion, where everyone is comparing their private doubts to others' polished exteriors. This comparison is particularly toxic for Gemini because of your natural curiosity. You love to learn, to explore, to absorb knowledge from endless sources. But instead of letting this curiosity feed you, you sometimes let it overwhelm you. The more you learn, the more aware you become of what you don't know. Instead of saying, I've grown so much, you say, I'll never know enough. This is the moving target of imposter syndrome. You never allow yourself to arrive, because your mind always finds a next horizon. One way to begin shifting this pattern is to recognize the difference between striving and self-sabotage. Striving is healthy. It drives you to grow and evolve. But self-sabotage is when you dismiss every milestone as meaningless. For Gemini, the key is to pause and name your successes out loud. Write them down. Speak them to someone you trust. The act of recording your achievements anchors them into reality, making it harder for your restless mind to sweep them aside. Take the example of a Gemini writer who finishes a book. Instead of celebrating, their mind says, "But it's not as good as other authors," or "What if no one likes it?" Left unchecked, this voice will rob them of joy. But if they intentionally pause to acknowledge, "I wrote 300 pages. I followed through on a dream. That matters," they begin to rewire their relationship with success. This doesn't silence the critic overnight, but it balances the narrative. Another layer of Gemini's struggle with imposter syndrome lies in your love of performance. You are skilled at adapting, at showing a version of yourself that fits the moment. While this makes you magnetic in social settings, it can also leave you feeling hollow. You wonder, if I can play so many roles, who am I really? This doubt fuels a fraud narrative because you confuse adaptability with dishonesty. The truth is, your ability to shift and adjust is not deception. It's empathy. It's your way of meeting people where they are. Recognizing this reframe can help you see that you are not faking. You are connecting. Practical tools can support this shift. Mindfulness is one. Each time you notice the voice of self-criticism, pause and breathe before automatically believing it. Ask yourself, is this thought a fact or a fear? Is it evidence or assumption? Often, you'll realize the harshest things you tell yourself are not grounded in reality, but in old stories you've carried for years. By questioning your inner critic, you reclaim authority over your self-image. Mentorship is another powerful antidote. Gemini thrives in dialogue, so share your fears with trusted mentors or peers often brings relief. You may discover that people you admire deeply have felt the same way. Many brilliant minds, scientists, artists, leaders, have confessed to feeling like imposters at some point. Hearing this reminds you that imposter syndrome is not proof of inadequacy. It is a common shadow of ambition. The final key is self-compassion. For Gemini, who often intellectualizes emotions, this can feel foreign. Yet compassion is the medicine imposter syndrome craves. Instead of asking, "Am I enough?" try affirming, "I am learning, I am growing, and that is enough." Instead of waiting for perfection, allow yourself to be a work in progress. Because the truth is, the fraud narrative only dissolves when you stop fighting it and start embracing your humanity. You don't need to know everything, do everything, or be flawless. You only need to be real. When Gemini learns to soften the voice of self-criticism and step out of the endless cycle of comparison, something powerful happens. You begin to see yourself not as a fraud, but as a human being, brilliant, imperfect, evolving. You realize that the very doubts you carry are not signs of weakness, but signs of growth. And slowly, you allow yourself to inhabit your own brilliance without apology. For Gemini, one of the most exhausting aspects of imposter syndrome is the constant feeling of wearing a mask. Because you are naturally adaptable, you can play many roles with ease. The witty conversationalist, the reliable professional, the charming friend, the curious student. People admire this versatility, but inside you may wonder, if I can shift so easily, does anyone actually know the real me? This fear of being unseen or misunderstood fuels the narrative of fraudulence. You think, if they only knew what I'm really like, they wouldn't see me the same way. This dynamic shows up strongly in relationships. Gemini thrives on connection, yet your duality often leaves you feeling split. One part of you longs to be fully authentic, while the other part feels safer presenting only the polished version. You tell jokes when you're nervous. You change topics when emotions feel too heavy. You mirror others so they like you. These are survival strategies, not lies. But over time, they create a gap between your inner world and the version you show others. The larger this gap becomes, the more fraudulent you feel. Take, for example, a Gemini in a romantic relationship. Their partner praises them for being fun, clever, and engaging. But when sadness or insecurity arises, the Gemini may hide it, fearing it will make them less lovable. Over time, the suppression builds pressure. They begin to think, if I let them see my fears, they'll realize I'm not who they thought I was. Yet in reality, it is the withholding itself that creates disconnection. The truth, though raw, would deepen intimacy far more than performance ever could. The same pattern often emerges in friendships or workplaces. You may become the person who always has the right words, the one who keeps the energy light, the one who adapts to keep peace. And while others value this, you secretly crave someone who will see you without the mask. This craving is your intuition calling you back to authenticity. Because the truth is, Gemini, people cannot love or respect the real you if you never let them meet the real you. And the longer you hide, the more you convince yourself that the mask is all you have. Healing begins with vulnerability. For Gemini, vulnerability may feel risky because it cannot be managed with clever words or logic. It requires allowing silence, allowing truth, allowing yourself to be witnessed in your rawness. But vulnerability is the antidote to imposter syndrome in relationships. The moment you let someone see not only your strengths, but also your fears, you break the illusion of fraud. Instead of performing, you are present. And instead of being admired for an image, you are loved for your essence. Let's bring this into real-life context. Imagine a Gemini professional who has built a reputation as a confident public speaker. Inside, however, they battle nerves before every talk. For years, they've hidden this, thinking it would ruin their credibility. One day, before presentation, they choose to admit, I always get nervous before speaking. Instead of losing respect, the audience leans in with empathy. The admission humanizes them, makes them relatable, and paradoxically deepens their authority. By allowing authenticity, they step out of fraud narrative and into true connection. Practical tools can help you practice this authenticity in daily life. Start small. Share fear with a trusted friend. Admit when you don't know something instead of pretending you do. Allow yourself to say, I need support, even if part of you feels uncomfortable. These small acts build a new pattern, one where connection is built on truth, not performance. Over time, you realize the people who matter don't love you for your mask. They love you for your honesty. Another practice is self-acceptance in solitude. Imposter syndrome thrives when you only see yourself through the imagined eyes of others. Spend time journaling or meditating on the question, who am I when no one is watching? The more comfortable you become with your own raw presence, the less need you'll feel to perform in front of others. From this foundation, authenticity flows naturally into relationships. For Gemini, the transformation is profound. The moment you stop performing, you discover that your relationships actually deepen. People trust you more when you admit your struggles. They feel closer when you reveal your insecurities. They admire not just your brilliance, but your humanity. And most importantly, you feel free. Free from the exhausting burden of keeping up an image, free from fear of being exposed, free to simply exist as you are. Ultimately, living authentically is the cure for the fraud narrative. Because fraudulence only exists when there is a mask. When you choose vulnerability, the mask falls away. What remains is not performance, but a soul, real, imperfect, evolving. And that, Gemini, is more than enough. At its core, imposter syndrome is a distortion perception. It convinces you that your accomplishments are luck, your skills are insufficient, and your presence is temporary. But what if, Gemini, instead of seeing this as a curse, you reframed it as an invitation? What if the very self-doubt that haunts you could become the driving force that shapes your deepest growth and authenticity? Gemini is a sign of curiosity and movement. You are never content to stay still. You are always seeking, always learning. Imposter syndrome, though painful, reflects this hunger for growth. You feel like a fraud not because you are inadequate, but because you are stretching into spaces larger than your comfort zone. It is the growing pain of expansion. The mind resists whispering, I don't belong, while the soul is already planting roots. If you can reframe these feelings as evidence of evolution rather than failure, imposter syndrome transforms from an enemy into a teacher. Take, for example, a Gemini entrepreneur. They launch a new business and feel overwhelmed, constantly thinking, I don't know enough. I'm not experienced enough. This doubt could paralyze them, or it could motivate them to learn, to innovate, to remain humble and open. Instead of letting the fraud narrative shrink them, they use it as fuel for growth. Over time, their curiosity and adaptability lead to success, not because they silenced doubt, but because they turned it into momentum. Gemini's gift is in reframing, in shifting perspective. When you catch yourself saying, I don't deserve this, try shifting it to, I am learning into this. Instead of I don't belong here, say, I am expanding into new territory. This subtle reframe acknowledges both the discomfort and the truth. Growth always feels like unfamiliar ground. And you, Gemini, are wired to explore unfamiliar ground. Another way to transform imposter syndrome is to connect it with service. Often, Gemini feels fraudulent because you measure yourself against an impossible standard of perfection. But when you shift the focus outward, toward how your skills, words, or presence can serve others, the fraud narrative softens. It's no longer about proving yourself. It's about showing up. A Gemini teacher who doubts their expertise can still profoundly change a student's life with a single word of encouragement. A Gemini writer who fears their work isn't good enough can still touch someone deeply with their honesty. The value is not in being flawless. It is in being authentic. This is where your mercurial energy becomes your ally. Mercury connects, translates, and communicates. When you allow yourself to use your gifts not for validation but for contribution, imposter syndrome loses its power. It thrives when you focus inward, scrutinizing yourself. It weakens when you focus outward, asking, how can I serve what I know right now? Because in truth, Gemini, you don't have to know everything to make a difference. You only have to be willing to share what you do know with an open heart. Let's return to relationships here. Imagine a Gemini who feels unworthy in love, always afraid their partner will find out they are not as put together as they seem. Instead of hiding behind a mask, they choose honesty. Sometimes I struggle with feeling like I'm not enough. This act of vulnerability doesn't push love away. It invites it closer. The partner responds with reassurance, empathy, and shared humanity. Suddenly, the fraud narrative becomes a doorway to intimacy. What was once a weakness becomes a bridge. On a spiritual level, imposter syndrome can even be a call to humility. Gemini's brilliance sometimes tempts you toward perfectionism, but this shadow keeps you grounded. It reminds you that you are always learning, always evolving. And in this humility, you stay connected to the wonder of discovery. You realize that true mastery is not about never doubting. It is about showing up despite doubt. It is about saying, I may not know everything, but I am willing to learn. This willingness is where your true power lies. Ultimately, transforming imposter syndrome requires you to embrace your duality. Yes, there will always be a part of you that questions, doubts, and fears exposure. But there is also a part of you that knows, trusts, and shines. You do not need to silence one to empower the other. You need to let them coexist. The doubts keep you humble. The inner knowing keeps you brave. Together, they create a Gemini who is not only intelligent but deeply human. When you stop fighting imposter syndrome and begin to learn from it, everything changes. It no longer cages you. It propels you. It no longer defines you. It refines you. And in this alchemy, Gemini discovers a deeper truth. You were never a fraud. You were always becoming. For Gemini, the final step in healing imposter syndrome is liberation, the release of the constant need to prove yourself and the permission to simply exist as you are. This liberation doesn't mean you'll never hear the voice of doubt again. It means you'll no longer let it control your life. The key is learning to anchor into your authentic self so deeply that the fear of being a fraud loses its grip. Gemini's duality often leaves you searching for validation in the eyes of others. You want to be seen, understood, and appreciated, and there is nothing wrong with this. But imposter syndrome distorts this desire into dependence. It convinces you that your worth is determined by external praise or measurable success. The liberation begins when you shift your source of validation inward. Instead of asking, do they think I'm good enough? You begin to ask, am I aligned with my truth? This shift transforms your relationship with success, with failure, and with yourself. One way to anchor this is through ritual acknowledgement. At the end of each day, take a moment to name 3 things you honor within yourself. Moments when you spoke honestly, when you learned something new, when you showed kindness, when you dare to try. These acknowledgments may seem small, but they build an inner foundation of self-trust. For Gemini, who often overlooks achievements in pursuit of the next horizon, this practice roots you in the present and reminds you that your worth is not conditional on perfection. Another profound step is embracing imperfection as part of your humanity. Gemini often feels pressure to have it all together, especially because your quick wit and adaptability can create the illusion that you do. But true freedom comes when you allow yourself to be messy, uncertain, and in progress. When you admit mistakes, when you laugh at your own flaws, when you let yourself be human, you dismantle the illusion of fraudulence. Because fraudulence only exists when you are pretending. The moment you stop pretending, there is no fraud, only authenticity. Consider the story of a Gemini leader who always felt pressured to appear confident and composed. For years, they hid their insecurities, terrified of being found out. One day, they decided to share openly with their team. I don't always have the answers, and I feel nervous too. But I believe in our vision, and I trust we'll figure out together. Instead of losing respect, they gained it. Their honesty made them more relatable, more trustworthy, more inspiring. This is a paradox of authenticity. The very thing you fear will expose you as weak often reveals your greatest strength. Spiritual practice can also support this liberation. For Gemini, practices like breath work, meditation, or even creative expression become channels for connecting with your deeper self beyond the chatter of the mind. These practices remind you that you are more than your thoughts, more than your doubts, more than the stories of fraudulence you carry. You are a soul having a human experience. And imposter syndrome is simply one of the illusions you are here to transcend. As you integrate this wisdom, relationships transform too. When you stop performing, you begin attracting people who resonate with your truth. The connections that remain are not based on who you pretend to be, but on who you are. This creates a freedom in love, friendship, and community that no external achievement can provide. You finally realize that belonging does not come from proving yourself. It comes from being yourself. And perhaps most importantly, Gemini, you reclaim joy. Imposter syndrome steals joy by turning every success into suspicion. Liberation restores it. You begin to celebrate milestones without diminishing them. You laugh more easily. You take risks not to prove, but to play. You allow life to be an exploration again, not a test. In this state, your natural gifts, your curiosity, your adaptability, your brilliance shine without fear. The truth is, Gemini, you were never meant to feel like a fraud. You were meant to feel free. Free to learn, free to grow, free to change, free to be both brilliant and flawed at once. And when you embrace this freedom, imposter syndrome no longer defines you. It becomes just another chapter in your story, a reminder how far you've come, and of the courage it takes to live as your authentic self. Gemini, as we close this journey, take a deep breath and let the truth settle into your heart. You are not a fraud. You never were. What you have carried as imposter syndrome is not evidence of your inadequacy, but a reflection of your depth, your curiosity, your hunger to grow. You doubt yourself because you care deeply. You question your worth because you see the infinite possibilities still ahead. But that does not erase the brilliance of what you've already lived, learned, and created. Throughout this exploration, we've uncovered the roots of imposter syndrome in your dual nature, the way you hold both the confident twin and the doubting twin within you. We've seen how self-criticism, comparison, and the masks you wear can create the illusion of fraudulence. We've also seen how reframing these patterns can turn self-doubt into humility, masks into authenticity, and fear into fuel for growth. What once felt like a cage can now become your compass. The path forward is not about silencing every doubt. It is about learning to walk with them without letting them rule you. It is about remembering that adaptability is not deception, that imperfection is not weakness, and that vulnerability is not exposure but connection. Each time you speak honestly, each time you honor your achievements, each time you allow yourself to be human, you dismantle the fraud narrative and step more fully into freedom. And so, Gemini, I invite you to claim this truth. You belong. Not because you are perfect, not because you know everything, not because you've proven yourself beyond question. You belong simply because you are here, alive, evolving, and sharing your unique gift with the world. The people who matter do not want your mask. They want your essence. And when you give yourself permission to live from that place, you discover that the freedom you've been chasing has always been within you. Now I turn the question to you. When was the last time you felt imposter syndrome creeping in? And how did you move through it? Share your story in the comments below. Your words may be the light that helps another Gemini or anyone listening release their own doubts and remember their worth. Because healing imposter syndrome is not just an individual act. It is a collective awakening to the truth that we are all more than enough.